Terminators in the Imperium? Hell yeah. Hey guys, it's Paul, combat veteran, MMA fighter, and YouTuber. And today we are checking out one of Lutin's videos. Haven't done one of those in a while. This is on the Tactical Dreadnought Armor, aka the Terminator. But before we get started, be sure to check it out. I have new shirts in. You can see them back there. You can see what I'm rocking here. Link to the merch is down below. Check it out. Support the channel and buy yourself a cool shirt. I also have mugs and stickers and all kinds of stuff. Okay, having done that, let's get into it. The Blood Angels, we remember them from our last video. They're, wild. Yep, this is the same stuff that, they use in, Space Wing Death Hulk, Super Terminator, Heavy Flamer Heresy.
Terminator armor is not named so lightly, for the wearers of such revered pieces of war gear are exactly that, Terminators. The wearers of Terminator armor are the elite fighters of any Space Marine chapter. They are veteran Marines who have displayed such courage or skill that they are deemed worthy to be fitted with a suit of Terminator armor. Comprising a composite of ceramite and plasteel built around an adamantium exoskeleton, Terminator armor is immensely powerful. But it is also heavy and extremely difficult to use. These negative traits are often a trade-off for the sheer defensive and offensive power of Terminator armor. Its outer plating so thick and strong that it makes its wearer to all general purposes invulnerable, and its structure allowing it to be fitted with some of the heaviest weaponry available to individual Space Marines. Only Dreadnoughts and Centurions can carry equally powerful war gear. Now, as with all armour worn by Space Marines, it's important to understand that it is a form of power armour, and by that what we really mean is powered armour. Both ordinary power armour and Terminator armour contain massive bundles of artificial fibred muscles that are neurologically driven by the wearer. The only way that humans are able to use such tools is through the use of something known as the black carapace. It's basically the cybernetic neurological interface that you see is implanted in the skin of a Space Marine. It's also one of the gene seed organ implants given to Space Marines. What the black carapace does is it enables Marines to use their power armour as almost a second skin. It gives them very high levels of manoeuvrability. During the Great Crusade, the proto-imperium of the
I mean, this is interesting because in, of course, modern militaries, you know, we have the technology to make, I mean, more or less an entire human body bulletproof. The problem is it would weigh an insane amount, and it would encumber a soldier so greatly that they would be functionally like a static position. And if you can't move anyway, then you might as well just stick them in a bunker behind some sandbags. You know, so the trade-offs between weight and maneuverability have always been a factor in militaries, right? Again, in the modern solution, we have gone with what's called a plate carrier, which is where you have the heart and lung area of the human chest is protected by an armor plate. The back section has a similarly sized plate, and then usually there are two side plates to provide some protection along the sides. Interestingly, the side plate is actually below. It protects almost at like the kidney level. So, or maybe a little higher than the kidneys, but depending on fit. But it's interesting that that's the trade-off that we have deemed best between maneuverability and protection. You look back in history and you can see that mounted knights, right, would often have very heavy suits of armor. And it's sort of a stereotype that the suits of armor would be so heavy that the knight could not walk or move unassisted. And I think this has been proven untrue, that individuals wearing replica of knight armor are in fact fairly maneuverable and able to fight even when wearing full plate. And that's a testament to, again, the innovations of the time. You know, we think of the Middle Ages as not being very, having very developed technology, but if you look at early Middle Age armor, you'll see that it was like leather and mail, and then over time, the artisans and engineers of the era were able to create better and better defensive systems in response to better and better weapons. So this is the other, throughout history, again, we have an arms race between armor and weapons.
Emperor and the Mechanicum were working through developing continually new iterations of armor. Early Terminator armor became seen that it would eventually reach a new level of design and that it would fully replace power armor for the Astartes. The idea being that the Space Marines would primarily be more like an extremely heavy, blunt force trauma tool than a surgical scalpel. But one significant issue preventing this early on was that it's very difficult for the Imperium to produce from both a technological and resource standpoint. The raw materials required to produce even one suit of Terminator armor are prohibitively challenging, and this was even before the following millennia of darkness. Such developments, though, could have been possible had the Emperor and his rational thinking been allowed to continue, and had the human civilization not chosen to partially destroy itself. But they did, and so after the heresy, mankind would descend into the stagnant ignorance of state-enforced religious worship, not to mention it would also just periodically lose or have knowledge stolen from it and the Mechanicus. The most commonly seen and iconic Terminator armor is the Indomitus pattern, and while this is generally used by most chapters, some of the founding chapters may still have relic armor from the heresy or before. It is unusual but not impossible that a successor chapter would also have such ancient armor like Tartarus, Gorgon or Cataphracti Terminator armor. Other designations such as the Custodes and Grey Knights have their own versions known as Alarus and Aegis respectively. Powered armor though does not specifically require a black carapace or indeed any neurological interface in order for a human to use it. Now, the exact way in which a user operates all of its functions is not entirely clear. One thing that does have to happen though is that the armor has to be appropriately scaled. You, for example, couldn't just put on a Space Marine's power armor because your body would be too physically small. You could though wear a suit that has been appropriately scaled down for use by, say, the Sororitas, the Inquisition, or even rogue traders.
So wait, could there be scaled down Terminator armor that like a Sororitas would wear? Because that would be pretty wild to see. That would be fun.
And these suits are usually somewhat lighter in protection, but this is balanced by the maneuverability gained by the wearer. For the specialist units like the Sororitas, they will train extensively in their armor, and so despite not having the cybernetic interface of the Astartes, they can fight just as well. And remember that while the Imperium cannot just necessarily invent things, they are able to adapt and use what they already know, so taking something that exists and just slightly scaling it down is very much within their capabilities. The only problem with this is that the non-Astartes humans are not neurologically linked to the suit, so there's no way for them to gain the benefits that Space Marines have in terms of movement and other processes provided by the armor itself. For an ordinary human, it's more like a cumbersome exoskeleton. It also wouldn't provide any sensory information directly into the wearer, and while human wearers of power armor in the Imperium are seen to wear such armor for the units which require them, Terminator armor is far less common.
Okay, well, that answers that. Yeah, it is sort of interesting just to see the difference. And again, we don't really have those sort of interfaces in this day and age, but the skill of the user is sort of interesting to see when you look at different militaries. I think about like a professional military, again, like the United States, where their fighter pilots and their tank crewmen and other specialized vehicle operators tend to just have a phenomenal level of expertise. And in contrast to conscript militaries or militaries that are just a little less industrialized, sometimes it can be almost comical to see how less proficient they are with their weapons. Again, doesn't mean they can't use them, but it is hard and expensive to, say, keep a helicopter flying for, dozens or hundreds of hours a month. And if you can't do that logistically, then you're never going to have the pilots that are skilled enough to really operate those helicopters well.
A complete rarity, in fact. And beyond that, while it's known that some members of the Inquisition, usually the Ordo Malleus, have worn or wear Terminator armor, it's highly questionable how useful this would actually be. In the second chapter of the series Revelations, we see Inquisitor Sabathiel get into a suit of Terminator armor, where she then proceeds to fight some pleb cultists of all things. Moreover though, she's able to seemingly run and fight as normal, which is just not accurate at all as to our understanding of ordinary humans and power armor, not to mention Terminator armor itself. Because yes, even though an ordinary human male or female could certainly use Terminator armor, this would really be little more than standing in your own personal bunker, than it actually having a very practical role as a piece of equipment, because the limitations would be so severe in terms of mobility, not to mention that the movement itself is known to be something that's only handled with skill by the most veteran Space Marines. So while it has been known and it is possible, the likelihood of any ordinary humans or even Inquisition wearing Terminator armor to any real positive effect is just very unlikely. Another reason why Terminator armor became less
Well, now that would actually make sense then. If you're not sure if it'll work, that somebody has to put on Terminator armor, you're not going to put on Terminator armor and then have them engage in like a super high skill fight. You'd want them to put it on and just see how it operates against some pretty easily bested opponents. So, the Imperium, being what it is, isn't going to have you fight robot drones or servitors. They'll have you fight some random rabble that, for one reason or another, is deemed heretical. So actually, that would make sense, right? They probably did it. And also, it's powered armor, right? It's going to be clunky, but I don't think it would be impossible or unusable. I just think it wouldn't be up to the standard, the superhuman standards expected of Space Marines. But again, if you're talking about a slightly, gene-modified cultist, yeah, even someone being pretty clunky in power armor is still probably gonna get shellacked.
popular to replacing power armor, which continued to be developed and improved, was the exploitation of Terminator armor during and after the heresy. Now, up until this time, it had still been expected that Terminator armor would become a slow but natural progression for Marines as their primary fighting armor, but during the emergence of the traitors, soon we would see Space Marine fighting Space Marine, which would subsequently highlight a major problem for Terminator armor. Because despite its bulk and powerful strength to enable it to withstand massive firepower, its lack of mobility combined with the inherent weakness in all power armor being of course the joints, which requires a degree of mobility, it meant that this could be more easily exploited from precise shots or close quarter melee, but especially by those who had learned where the very best place to exploit these chinks in the seemingly impregnable armor would be. So then what you would see would be traitor Marines wearing ordinary power armor that was simply able to outmaneuver the bulkier armor of Terminators and basically run rings around them. So while it still has its role to play, it was decided that given the turn of events that had occurred, it was no longer a practical plan to equip all Astartes with tactical dreadnought armor. It has become especially useful in fighting more instinct-driven species like Tyranid and Orcs, or those who prefer to not get their hands dirty like the Tau. Now in the future, with the Primaris and Belisarius call, it's possible that this concept could continue to move forward.
Yeah, it's like we talked about, you have to find a balance between mobility and armor, right? And so it sounds like they did find that, right, the Space Marines. But what we've seen in history is that often these forces, heavily armored and lightly armored, can work in conjunction to achieve a synergistic effect, right? Think about, for example, a knight and a pikeman. You had lightly armed pikemen who would form a defensive wall, effectively, against enemy knights, whereas your knights were the hammer, right? So you could be a hammer and an anvil. The pikemen could also protect the knights, right, from enemy charges and disable the enemy's knights as they came in. So, you've got this interesting dynamic. Again, we see it in World War II with the classic urban warfare configuration of a heavily armored tank being supported by light infantry. The light infantry prevent enemy anti-armor teams from getting close to the tank, and the tank provides a rolling type of indirect fire support for the infantry. So this is probably the dynamic that the Space Marine chapters can or should try to enable, which is to have a Terminator armor functioning as a bulwark or a strong defensive point where they are supported by lighter, more mobile Space Marines. And again, you wonder if another lightweight, like a guardsman or some sort of other extremely light, extremely mobile force would be able to provide, additional support to Marines where they are unable to do so.
In fact, it is known that Cole studied under the Emperor himself and was even responsible, at least in part, for the development of the black carapace. Cole has since seemingly forgotten how this was possible in the modern age. However, one could speculate that if he achieved this once, he could do so again. And if he were able to develop a more widespread system of neurological interface, this could enable ordinary humans to have much wider access to scaled down armor types. Now in that situation, this is when you could see the emergence of, say, Imperial Guard officers, important battlefield units wearing power armor, and certainly more widely in the Inquisition. The idea though of replacing existing armor has really been retired though at this point, because many of the fighting systems and tactics of the Astartes are so refined, and by now already many other specialized types of suits coming into use, it's unlikely that they would return to the archaic concept of slow, bulky sledgehammers. In fact, you only have to look at the development of the Centurion armor to see that the Adeptus Astartes have begun to move on from the concept of widespread Terminator armor usage. Centurion's armor was developed during the Age of Apostasy by the Mechanicus, and during this time the Mechanicus was scouring the galaxy, as it continues to today, for fragments of STC data. And around this earlier period though, they had more success, and some of their discoveries could not be replicated or were beyond the ability of the tech priests to be able to adapt them for use. But the material that they could use, among other things, enabled them to develop the Centurion armor. Now, unlike Terminator armor, the Centurion is more like a battle suit. It encases around the power armor of the Space Marine and becomes more like a walking vehicle. Centurion suits are also said to have a machine spirit not dissimilarly to, say, Land Raiders or other powerful pieces of tech like Titans and Knights. When it comes...
Yeah, that seems really bizarre to have like a suit over your suit that does the exact same thing. Usually if you're going to do something like that, you would want it to bring a really specialized capacity to the battlefield, whereas just like a super armor suit on top of more armor suit is kind of nonsense.
Comes to Terminators though, the Astartes have now deemed it necessary,
especially when you already have Terminator armor,
to adapt their role and tactics to compensate for its shortcomings. In the past, Terminators would be just left to sort themselves out, but now they can often be supported by other Astartes, with one balancing out the other's shortcomings.
Called it.
Terminators providing heavier firepower, and the Marines wearing standard armor providing more maneuverable defenses for them. And while Terminator armor is revered by their chapters, it's also just known to be very, very valuable. It's difficult to produce technologically and just in terms of resources, and for this reason considerable effort will be given to recovering fallen Terminator armor in battle, not dissimilarly but not as much as, say, a Titan falling and the recovery of the Princeps. The rarity though is not the only reason for the extreme lengths that will be given to recovering suits of Terminator armor. Another reason is the mark worn on all left shoulder plates by Terminators, the crux terminatus. And the crux terminatus replaces where the ordinary chapter identifier would be, because it holds special significance. And that significance is not limited to simply the fact that the Space Marine wearer has been deemed worthy to operate such a revered relic of Imperial hardware, because it is said that the crux terminatus contains a small shard of the Emperor's own power armor, that the Emperor's armor was melted down after he was interred into the Golden Throne, and it is said that this may give the wearers some holy protection.
Could you even melt down the Emperor's power armor? Like, is it even something that would melt? Because I assume it's not a metal, right? Like, you can't melt ceramic. I mean, I guess in theory you could, maybe, if you got it, like, hot enough, but... Yeah, like if you had a composite material, which I believe it is, right? Composites are going to have different melting points. So you melt them down, but maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe they're just like, fuck it, it's going to be a relic anyway. And anyway, if you're the Emperor and you come back, which all seem to believe he'll come back sooner or later, I would be pissed if they melted my power armor and then gave it to a bunch of chapters I had literally never heard of.
and enable its wearer to survive damage that would likely be beyond what even you would expect the Terminator to survive from. Now, while there is likely some element of truth to this, it seems probable that only a few Terminators in the modern age would actually likely have any crux which still contains such an element, unless they've been keeping a special container somewhere on Mars or Terra for this sole purpose, and they've been rationing it with very expert skill. The truth though is that there simply wouldn't have been enough of the Emperor's own armour, huge as it was, to have been able to distribute it in such a way across all the Terminators that are and have existed in the past 10,000 years. In the modern Imperium though,
I mean, they could work some sort of dumb scheme like, oh my gosh, what's it called? The fake medical stuff. Oh my gosh. It's the help me out, commenters. It's the okay, it's the one where they're like, think that water that's exposed to tinier and tinier elements of like a particle can take on its traits. They're like, oh, water has memory. It's total bunk science. It has no basis in reality. But they like dilute things further and further in an effort to homeopathic, that's it. Homeopathic medicine, right? Where you're just like, oh yeah, this water contains 2 molecules of gold and it's like a gallon of water. But like, we all know that there's no way to detect 2 molecules of gold. So what it probably just is them diluting it further and further, right? So maybe they melted down the Emperor's power armor and then like diluted it in like 1.5 tons of steel or like 15 tons of steel and just like kind of swirled it all around. And we're just like, yeah, Emperor's power armor could be in this. And then you just give every Terminator armor like a nickel, you know? And when you start to get down to like half your big pot of, you know, steel, you just pour in some more and dilute the Emperor's armor further, right? So that 10,000 years later, there's probably like 3 atoms of the Emperor's armor in this giant multi-ton chunk of steel, right? But you get the symbolic value of being like, no, it's the Emperor's own armor, man.
Even for Astartes themselves, this belief in the power of the Emperor to provide people with some kind of holy shield is not entirely without demonstrable evidence. However, it also seems likely that there is possibly some other explanation to the crux and this idea of it having protective power. We know that other marks and sigils have actual technological power. A chaplain's rosarius, for example, contains powerful shielding. Given the look of the crux, it seems very reasonable to assume they operate in a similar way, and that perhaps in the Imperium for the Terminators, because of their fearful and revered status, it suits the believers of the Emperor and the ecclesiarchy better to describe how Terminators are saved by the power of the Emperor rather than some technological system. This, after all, has become the very doctrine of the Imperium: reject science, put your faith in the Emperor, so it's entirely understandable how such a tale about the crux could become so widely believed.
Yeah, that sounds like the Imperium we all know and love.
Now, usually all chapters first company will have Terminators, but often only an original founding chapter will have a large amount of Terminator units. Second founding successor chapters will often have considerably less. The thing is that the true skill with Terminator armor is less about fighting skill, although of course that's always expected from veteran Marines. Terminator armor, primarily because of its bulk, is more about the skill to move in any coherent, reasonable way without just falling over. Terminators are usually implemented for extremely dangerous close-quarter environments where a normal guardsman or even say a space marine could fall foul of an enemy stepping out from a narrow hiding place and blasting them in the back with a powerful point-blank shot. Now granted, even standard space marine armor is strong, but dependent on the type of enemy or just how much the marines were open to tolerating such a risk, Terminators might be employed. And that is because the armor to all but the most extreme of threats is nigh invulnerable. Terminators can be deployed physically to battle by, say, a Land Raider or a Storm Raven, but Terminators are often a deep strike.
Sorry, I'm just having a hard time wrapping my head around the idea that the best place for your largest, bulkiest armor is in a close quarters. I just feel like there's so many circumstances where your maneuverability would be impeded so much. I mean, imagine a derelict Imperial naval vessel where the doorways are designed for unarmored human beings to walk through. As a Terminator, you would get stuck all the time unless you want to just like rip your way through it, but something tells me ripping off bulkheads is probably not like a great strategic choice. now having Terminators to clear certain parts of a ship, perhaps as part of a larger boarding party, yeah, definitely. Terminators would be perfect for that, right? Because they're a tank level of firepower, but in a compact walking form. So, I would definitely have a Terminator armor as a part of my boarding party, but it would not constitute my boarding party, right? The ideal boarding party to me would involve like 1 or 2 individuals in Terminator armor. It would involve, depending on the size of the vehicle, contingent of guardsmen and a contingent of space marines, right? The guardsmen would bring specialized capabilities, right? Communication and that sort of thing. They would also they could just be eyes and ears, right? Being able to, for example, let's say secure a foothold within a ship, right? And then just hold it while the space marines go and clear new areas. And then once those areas are clear, the guardsmen enter and expand the secure perimeter, right? You would also, of course, have, guardsmen could search and enter areas that are too tight, too compact for even space marines in power armor. Then you have space marines that are like the middle ground, right? They can go on offense and clear out large areas that are known to have a strong enemy presence. And of course, you have Terminators who can charge in, secure an area, stand and absorb fire while your space marines maneuver. Right, like we talked about, a greater diversity of tactical unit types in close quarters combat is appropriately used going to be more effective than just relying on a single exploitable configuration.
Weapon. What this means is that unlike most Marines, they're able to use the ability of teleportation. As with many systems used by the Imperium, this actually utilizes the warp itself. And while using the warp is always dangerous, it's generally considered that this is an acceptable risk. It's a trade-off. It's not especially safe, but the benefits are very high. So while teleportation is achieved via machines, it's essentially a psychic power. This teleportation is usually enhanced by a homing beacon placed by scouting units as necessary. Teleporting without a homing beacon is possible, but it can lead to any number of problems such as materializing as a scattered unit or inside of an object. Although apparently Imperial teleportation units do have systems in place to prevent this from being fatal. Teleportation enables Terminators to strike at the very heart of enemy battle lines, and this causes absolute chaos or even can trigger the collapse of enemy command and turn a battle, because having 5 or 10 invulnerable killing machines appear out of nowhere who then proceed to begin absolutely shredding your own guys is generally going to have that kind of effect. A Terminator squad, when fighting alone in a deep strike situation, or say within a Space Hulk exterminating hordes of Xenos Tyranids, will have to share tactical information. The armor itself has any number of sensory...
That is actually very interesting. Again, would I send it back to like an enemy command post? Not if I wanted to see those Terminators again, but what I might do is use it to open up another flank to relieve pressure on a primary Space Marine unit, right, where they can link up once the enemy starts to turn, right, or to help isolate an enemy that is going to be withdrawn or cut off. But sending your Terminator armor into the rear near the enemy command post where they won't be able to be supported is a great way to lose your company's Terminator armor. And if you use tactics like that, then you know what? Maybe that's why the Imperium keeps running out.
Systems that feed back to their helmets, which themselves contain significant data collection tools. They can share live video feed with each other, and through the black carapace their own sensors are fed with the collective information, and this will help to limit the chances of them being fatally caught unaware. It's unknown just how much of this can be attributed to the original standard template design from the Dark Age of technology, but considering that the original armoured suit was designed as a heavy repair suit, potentially for having to repair critically damaged systems in extremely hazardous conditions, the mass sensor collection system and data feed sharing would play a large part in the original design of the armoured unit.
See, this is what's interesting to me, is that the Terminator armor, right, is based on just a highly secure piece of technology, or a very secure piece of personal protective gear for like repairing, I imagine, like a damaged fusion reactor or something. And so it begs the question, then why is it so hard to engineer it for standard human beings when the base construction is for standard humans? Remember, the Emperor was the one who invented the Astartes or Thunder Warriors, or these genetically and biologically enhanced superhumans. So the original Terminator armor is meant for a regular-sized human being. Why then is it so hard to engineer it for more regular-sized human beings?
Now, in addition to the protective suit itself, Terminators can wield a terrifying array of firepower, much of which is usually limited to being mounted on vehicles. The standard issue for them is a Storm Bolter and a Power Fist, and this gives a Terminator strong stopping power and crippling close-quarter capability against any foe. But upgraded units may be given a Chain Fist, which is pretty much as it sounds. It's typically as unpleasant as all chain weapons are. Heavier ranged weapons can include assault cannons and heavy flamers, both devastating weapons for an individual to wield. The most powerful piece of ranged war gear is known as the Cyclone Missile Launcher, which is a personal missile system mounted atop the Terminator, and it's reminiscent of that used on Imperial Knights and even Titans. For close
that's just ridiculous.
quarters, Terminators can also use lightning claws and power swords to literally shred their enemies, and they may often be seen also wielding a Thunder Hammer and Storm Shield combination to grind their enemies into the dirt. Despite its various shortcomings within the modern Imperium, Terminator armor is still the definitive personal armor in terms of defensive strength. While standard power armor continues to improve with the development of Primaris armor variants, the most comparable to Terminator armor being the Mark X Gravis heavy armor, but Terminator armor is still the most personally durable for an individual. This is of course still a trade-off for its limited movement, but with the forward movement of the Imperium, it's possible that they may still achieve their goal of retrofitting their entire force. Perhaps not literally with Terminator armor as it is seen today, but with some variation which balances the trade-off and minimises limitations for the wearer. But then equally, nothing may ever be quite as tough as Terminator armor itself. But the development of other tech such as Centurion armor does make them look ever more archaic. However, Terminator's ability to deep strike and teleport into the enemies of mankind still makes them a terrifying force.
Yeah, that is a absolutely unreal ability to have for a unit.
That none would want.
The ability to just drop in. Again, I would probably not use it on my enemy's command post, but again, just to take the area where the enemy believed them secure and make it insecure, even if it's literally just an extra flank, just 100, 200 meters behind them or off to the side, right? You can turn anywhere into an L-shaped ambush. The level of potential on that skill is just insane.
Want to face
in the real world. I'm sure on the tabletop it's like useful but not decisive.
Invincible killing machines who would break you in half if you weren't cut to pieces in the first seconds. Terminators, if nothing else, remain a devastating tool for bludgeoning enemy morale in a siege battle. They also remain the preferred suit of the Grey Knights, who have to deal with incomprehensibly horrific enemies. For all the tools which exist for the modern Astartes, it would be fair to say the Terminators remain the sledgehammer of the Imperium.
Nice. I mean, you gotta say, they look badass. Alright guys, that was actually pretty cool. I really feel like I got some context on Terminator armor that I probably should have had before I watched Space Hulk Deathwing, but you know what? Seeing what they can do is probably the most fun, and then learning about the lore afterward is the second most fun. So again, thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments if there's other Lutin videos you want me to check out. He's definitely the definitive lore guy. But also be sure to check out the merch store, right? New stuff, mugs, shirts, stickers, you name it. Fun designs. And yeah, until next time, I will see you guys later.